We're going to get started then. I'm going to start with some housekeeping. Janice is not here to yell at us, so I have to remind you that when we're done, we have to move out of here efficiently. And so the cleaning people will come in and do their thing. And so the office will be open. Our team will clean up the chairs, move everything back. The food will all, whatever's left will be back into the office. And so please come and join us in the office after the presentation. Thank you. Okay. How many members do we have here? Members of the Canal Society of New Jersey. Wow. Okay. Now, you know, we're having an election tonight, so I think John has passed out ballots. Please fill out those ballots and give them back to him by the end of the night. John, would you like to say something to the people?
Thanks. Hi, my name is John. I am the archivist, but I am also handling this tonight. I think I got most everybody's ballot handed out. I know there's a few latecomers. Bob, I'll get you, etc. Mr. back there, I know. Yeah, so I'll get you later. I want to just give you a quick briefing about what we're doing here. You are all esteemed members, of course. Tonight you have the chance to vote on our new bylaws. So a little bit about that. Recently, we developed and have implemented our strategic plan, which will put us in a position to better fulfill our mission, expand our reach, enhance our governance. That's a big word, and become more efficient. In order to reach our goals, our strategic plan also calls for an updated set of bylaws. The ones we have, I won't tell you their age, but they're a little past due, if you will. Yeah, right. So with the new bylaws, they were based on our requirements and have been reviewed and approved by our board and our lawyer, for what it's worth. So with this change, you will still enjoy the benefits of membership and hopefully our planned improvements. So we hope you vote yes.
Thank you, John. Do we have any non-members or new or guests here tonight? Welcome. What induced you to join us? Sir. Okay. Another canal. There are other canals. I forgot about those other canals. Good. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Consider becoming a member. Folks over there. Yes. Welcome, drag along, sister. Cool. Okay. Okay. Think about becoming members. We're cheap. We do all kinds of cool stuff. Think about that. Okay. Events. We just finished up, almost finished up the year. So many things this year. We ended up the season with events, a Sunday event in Wharton and in Morristown on the Green on the same rainy day. It poured, but that didn't keep the people away. We had a great day in both places. Outstanding. Tim and I did an anniversary of the DNR Canal State Park at the Paulsville Mill, another fine event. And we had a great volunteer luncheon. So that's almost wrapping up this year's event. There's still the NJTPA working group meeting on the 2nd of December. For those of you who love to attend those things. So many projects. We've just completed signed projects in Ledgewood and Wharton, still working on one in Powerville. It's almost done. We've been working on scanning projects with the state archives, scanning their map collection is huge. We are maps, and we're into a third round of scanning on that project, and also digitizing some of our text things that will be searchable, and we'll have lots of that stuff online. Our book project with Bob Goller. I don't know if you heard me talk about this forever, but Bob is just on the verge of getting us a final copy, and we've laid down the law. This, when he hands us that disc, that's it. So, yes, I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah. But
I wasn't good, but now.
okay, all right, I can, we've laid down the law that he can't fuss with it anymore. We're giving him all the time to do what he needs to do, and then he's gonna give it up. And so also Bill McKelvey is working on a trolley book. And so there you are. Yes, we recognize you. And so he's working on a trolley book that's really going to be neat. It's still in the works, probably early next year. It's going to be ready for you folks to buy. Volunteering. There are so many projects, so many things that we're doing. Well, we're working at Waterloo with our programming every Saturday. Next year, we hope to be working at the Lock site in Wharton, and now we're developing other sites in Bloomfield with the Collins House, and we need more people to join us and to do cool things. Volunteering is fun. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to give up hours and days of your time, but we need people to do a couple of things here and there when they've got some time. And so, Bobby, raise your hand. Bobby is our marvelous volunteer coordinator, and she would love to talk to you about possibly joining us and do some volunteering. Hey, yes, absolutely.
Especially the kids, their eyes light up when they see the water wheel and all that.
Mhm.
So it's well worth the morning.
Once again, you don't have to be a genius. You start off working with somebody who's been doing this for a long time, and pretty soon you learn the spiel, and you learn about canals and grist mills and all kinds of cool things, and you're telling people and getting people interested in interesting things. Lastly, sales. Christmas is coming, and we've got hats and T-shirts for sale. Hats and T-shirts are good for you, so they're on sale. Yes,
They're good for your health.
absolutely, they're good for your health, packed with vitamins. That's in the office after the meeting. Please see us, and if you'd like to give some hats or T-shirts as Christmas gifts.
June 21st, Canal Day next year.
Okay, we're already starting to plan next year.
Right.
God help us.
Put it on your calendar.
Oh, dear. We're not even finished with this year. We're already planning with the next year, June. And so, any announcements? Okay, then we're going to get started with Tim. You're going to give us a presentation on.
How many? No, kidding. Of course.
There we go.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We are asking, last meeting, we got out of here a little bit late. The whole cleaning crew was waiting. So we are asking you to hold all questions, comments till the end of the program. I'll take it virtually first, and then we have to get out of here. I can move to the office and take any more questions or comments you have on the presentation. But please, thank you for sticking with that. This is a presentation. I came up with this for Roxbury Library. I did it back in July. It was very popular, so popular. People were, at the door, they couldn't get in, and it was sold out. So I decided they asked me if I wanted to do it again. I said, well, I'll do it for our program meeting, because we're always looking for speakers here. And that's because Roxbury Township was a very interesting place. It's the summit of the canal. It's where the main feeder is. We have 7.5 miles, 293 feet in elevation. We have Lake Hopatcong outlet, which that's a whole story in itself. And we're going to visit 5 inclined planes. So we're going to do a west to east journey on the canal through Roxbury Township. Now, if you look at this 1868 map, the first thing you might notice is Roxbury was bigger back then than it is today. And that's because it encompassed what is today Mount Olive on the left side of the body of water that you see there. So if we went through it as it was back then, this would even be a longer presentation. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do Roxbury Township as it is today. And that starts right in that red dot in the middle of the map there. Now, if you happen to go to my Byron Stanhope presentation earlier this year at Wild West City, one of the more interesting venues I've done presentations. This is where we ended. I know a few of you went to this. So where we ended Byron Stanhope is where we're beginning for Roxbury Township. So that red dot is right in a body of water, and you might recognize that as hey, where's Ken? Thank you, Pierce. How do I mix it?
Try that.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Oh, there it goes. Is that me? Okay, now it's working. All right. Lake Musconetcong, as Beers said, even though Lake Musconetcong has a Lenni Lenape word, the Lenni Lenape never saw it because nature didn't give us this body of water. It is man-made, and it was made for the Morris Canal. And it wasn't even made when the canal was first built. It was made, the canal opened in 1831. About 10 years later, the canal was already obsolete, and that's because the demand for the cargo that the canal was transporting was increasing greatly. They needed bigger boats. They needed a way to transport more cargo. So they pretty much hit the reset button, sold a lot more stock with the Morris Canal Banking Company, and totally redesigned the canal. They made it larger, made the locks larger, totally redesigned the canal, the inclined planes, and they need a lot more water. So while Lake Hopatcong was the main source of water, they created this body of water, which was called at the time Stanhope Reservoir. Now, if you're not aware, other secondary bodies of water that fed the canal, Greenwood Lake, Cranberry Lake, Bear Pond were also reservoirs for the Morris Canal, in addition to numerous rivers and brooks. But you see some photos here. Now, of course, to transport the boats across the lake, you needed a towpath for the mules to pull the boats. So they had to raise the towpath up. So we had this towpath going across the lake. Now, a lot of people ask me, why would they design the canal going right through the lake? They didn't. They built the canal, and then the lake came later. Now, a lot of people ask, is there a towpath? Is it still there under the Lake Musconetcong? If you ever drive down Central Avenue, which takes you from Lake Hopatcong to Netcong, you might look out Lake Musconetcong and see these waterfowl that look like they're standing on top of the water. Well, that is no miraculous event. They are standing on that towpath. And back in 2016, I was driving down Central, and I looked back, and I saw exactly what you see in the lower left there. Whatever reason, Lake Musconetcong was very low, and there the towpath reappeared. Now, being a crazy Morris Canal enthusiast like I am, I went home, threw my kayak in the car, came back, and paddled out there just so I can stand on the towpath. And there you see, I took a picture, and it's the same one as the one you see above it, which is looking across the lake, and it's looking towards the first inclined plane we're going to talk about, which is plane 1 west. Now, if you're not familiar with the numbering sequence, Lake Hopatcong's the summit. That's where the numbering starts, and all the blocks in planes go 1 west, 2 west, 3 west, all the way to Phillipsburg, and on the east side, 1 east, 2 east, 3 east, all the way to Jersey City. So as we go through Roxbury Township, we're going to go from west to east. If you're also not familiar with inclined plane technology, most of you are, but basically any change in elevation greater than 10, 15 feet, instead of using locks, inclined planes were used. And basically, you see the diagram above, the water came from the upper canal, underwater, turned a large turbine underground, and then that created the power to pull the boats up and down on cradles that were on railroad tracks. And you see in the lower left photo, that's looking down, and you see the towpath going across Lake Musconetcong. And you can find that today. There's 2 little pieces of land that jut out where Lake Hopatcong, where that inclined plane is. That is public access land. That is state park land. So if you park just a little bit to the west of that, you can walk along the water and visit that. It looks like it's private property, but it is not. That's that's Plain One West. And that ascended up to our first municipality or village, and that's Port Morris. Now, there are many villages and towns in northern New Jersey with the name Port on it. Port Murray, Port Colden, Port Morris, Rockport, Shippingport, and Port Orem, which we know today as Wharton. Port Morris was the summit village of the canal. It was the 915 feet above sea level. And as you came up Plain One West, you came to this large basin. Now, many basins were along the Morris Canal. Main purpose is to turn. Canal was 40 feet wide. The boats are 91 feet long. You can't pull a U-turn in the middle of the canal. You need a basin. There are also places to stop for the night. So back then, Port Morris was a booming village. There were stores and hotels and blacksmith shops. This was a popular place to stop. Also, they were typically located at the bottom or tops of plains or locks, because if you were riding at night and you came to one that was closed for the night, you would have to stop. So if you were traveling west from Lake Hopatcong and it was after dark, the plane would be closed. So you would stop here at Port Morris. So you see on the upper left, there's the cradle sitting in the water. So the boat would have come out of there. And there you see at the right is a good shot of the basin. The canal ran 6 days a week, every day except Sunday. Now, Port Morris started as a canal town. It evolved into a big railroad town. If you know anything about the Lackawanna cutoff, which has been news lately, that Port Morris figures very heavily into that. But you can see there's a couple of rail photos here. You can see there's a big roundhouse. And in the lower left, you see all the rail lines that came into Port Morris. And there's a basin right behind it. And I think this is the point where the canal probably wasn't running that much, because you could see the cradle sitting in the water, but trains were running. And in the lower right, you see the what we see today. Most of the rail lines are gone, but you see those two buildings there that were right in the basin. One was a canal store, still exist. Now, I'm actually trespassing here. I'm on railroad property, so don't do what I do. But the words you see on the lower right there, that is public access property. It's Roxbury Township. You can visit that, and that was the site of that basin I've talked to. So to get there, go up Palmer Street to the end, and on the right, you see this little pocket park. It's just a little loop trail there, but it'll show you where the basin was at the head of inclined Plain One West. So you might know where it was the bottom, where in the lake. This could tell you where it is, where it stopped at the top. No, I put a blaze there, and then someone tore it off. The local residents are not keen about people, but it is public, so you can go there. So from the basin, the canal headed east along what is now Canal Street. You can see the Canal Street's on the left there. Blackwell General Store, that was a big store and hotel in Port Morris. Today, Central Avenue is the main part of Port Morris. Back then, Canal Street, where the canal was, that's where the main business was. And this would be a place that the canal is used. Canal boats had very little storage, no refrigeration, so they needed stores all along the canal, and this was a typical one. So that is Port Morris. So heading east, we head now to Lake Hopatcong. Now there's a lot to say about Lake Hopatcong. Two main things I like to say. Lake Hopatcong is where the Morris Canal was born and where it died. And where it was born, it involves two gentlemen, and both these gentlemen we had programs on this year. The first one is George McCullough. And if you know anything about the legend is back in 1822, George McCullough was fishing on what we now know as Lake Hopatcong, and he struck on the idea of using the lake to feed the canal across the state. And I always have a picture in my mind. He's sitting there in the rowboat with his line in the water, and light bulb goes over his head. Build a canal. Well, probably didn't work like that, but we know exactly why the demand for a canal was needed. And if you look at his 1822 quote, Mr. McCullough says, "The mouth of the Musconetcong is close to inexhaustible mines of coal, which could be afforded in New York so cheap as to exclude not only Liverpool coal, but also wood, which grows daily dearer." So what he's basically saying there is our main fuel source is wood. It's running low. We got all this anthracite coal out in Pennsylvania. We need a way to transport it into New Jersey. Now, what's interesting about this quote is he says, well, we have two alternatives if we don't build a canal. Continue using wood or use Liverpool coal. Now, we all know because of the Beatles, Liverpool's in England. What he doesn't say, so that means transport it all the way from Europe. What he doesn't say is transport it in by road. And that's because transporting large cargo by road was so infeasible back then that it was actually easier and more efficient to ship it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to truck it in from the next state over. And that's pretty amazing, but that's what drove the demand for canals in the early 19th century. Now we're going to jump ahead to 1913, and another gentleman named Hudson Maxim has this quote: "Lake Hopatcong is threatened with ruination. The prosperous communities around it are threatened with extinction, and our most precious mountain lake resort is in imminent danger of being wiped off the map." So what has happened in those intervening years? Our whole relationship with water changed. In the beginning of the 19th century, water was used for industry. It was used for transportation, it was used for power. Once we got in the 20th century, we had much better means of transportation, mostly rail. We had better means of power, but we fell in love with water recreation. Water recreation wasn't a big thing in the early 19th century. In fact, it was considered dangerous to submerge your whole body in water. By the early part of the 20th century, we loved swimming, we loved sailing, we loved paddling. Jersey Shore was going crazy. It was booming. And Lake Hopatcong was the biggest freshwater resort in the lake. So we created this lake for the Morris Canal, and now it was a big resort area. So Hudson Maxim, who owned considerable land on the western side of the lake, he led the cause to abandon the canal. So the perspective on Hudson Maxim varies widely. If you're a Lake Hopatcong person, he's a hero. You know, he saved our beautiful lake, and there are streets and schools and monuments for him and so on. If you're a Morris Canal enthusiast like we are, he's the most evil man that ever existed. He's selfish, he's greedy, he destroyed our beautiful canal for his own greedy purposes. Where does truth lie? Somewhere in between those two extremes. But that was really what caused it. It was our relationship with water changed greatly. Now we did, if you came to our earlier program meetings, we had programs, both these gentlemen, Ryan Hyman from the McCullough Hall Museum did a presentation on George McCullough. Marty came from Lake Hopatcong Historic Museum, did one on Hudson Maxim. They're great presentations. If you missed them, they're on our YouTube channel, Now Society of New Jersey YouTube. You can see them. Both have very interesting stories beyond just the Morris Canal. Okay, second thing I like to say about Lake Hopatcong. Morris Canal exists because of Lake Hopatcong. Lake Hopatcong exists because of Morris Canal. Now, that second statement might cause a little bit of confusion because you could say, well, I've seen 18th century maps where it says Hopatcong Pond, or it might say Great Pond, or it might say, as this 1769 map says, Musconetcong Pond. So yeah, there was a body of water there, but what's Lake Hopatcong today was actually two bodies of water. On this map, Musconetcong and Little Pond, and they were much, much smaller. So to put it into perspective, you look at the 1769 map, you see a place called Brooklyn Ferry. That's the area that today is Hopatcong State Park. It's a good almost mile above the southern tip of the lake. Back then, it was below the southern tip of the lake. So when the Morris Canal was created, they raised the level of the lake 5 feet. It connected these two bodies of water, and it created most of these coves that you see in the lake. So you might have heard an untrue statement that Hopatcong is letting Loppy word meaning lake of many coves or honey water of many coves. Absolutely untrue. It doesn't translate any way anyhow like that. That was a 20th century marketing term. Most of these coves were created for the Morris Canal. Now, I powerboated on Lake Hopatcong for 13 years, and I tell you, when you got the water really low like it is now, and you venture into one of these coves, you're fouling out your prop quite often. I went through a lot of props on those very dry summers. So to get the water from Lake Hopatcong to the main canal, there was a feeder. It was only about a half mile long, and it went from what is today Hopatcong State Park down to the main canal, which is about where that landing shopping center was. And the feeder was used for transportation, two main purposes. The initial purpose was the transportation of iron ore. Now, iron ore was mined up on Sparta Mountain. It came down to Nolan's Point on the eastern side of the lake by the Ogden Mine Railroad. And then it was transferred across the lake on the canal boats pulled by steamers. So if you see the photo in the lower left, you see those are the canal boats at that iron ore dock in Nolan's Point, and they're loading it up. And then they're going to be towed across the lake. So you might hear the canal enthusiasts like us, and we get all uptight when people say barges. We say they're not barges, they're boats because they're navigated. Here in this case, they are barges because they're being towed across until they get over to the other side of the lake, to the canal, and then they're put back together and hooked up to mules and make their way down the canal. Now, the photo you see in the bottom right, we think it might be a Morris Canal boat coming on into the feeder canal. I talked to Marty Kane, who exported everything Lake Hopatcong, and I said, do you have any any photos of cargo boats on a feeder? He thinks this one is coming under the bridge, what that is now Lakeside Boulevard. So we don't know for sure, but it might be. But this transportation ended in 1882, and that's because they extended the Central Railroad of New Jersey up to Nolan's Point, so they no longer had to transport iron ore across the lake. It could be transported by from Nolan's Point by train. But at this point, another transportation purpose was coming in for the feeder, and that was the transportation of people. Now in the 1880s, Lake Hopatcong is becoming this big, huge resort. People are coming in on the train to what is today Hopatcong Station Landing, and we need to get them to the various resorts around the lake. Roads are very poor condition. They're not good. The best way to transport them is by water. So there is a steamer line called the Black Line that took them from Lake Hopatcong Station up the feeder through the lock into Lake Hopatcong and to whatever resort they were going to. Now, to get onto Lake Hopatcong, they had to go through a lock. This was called Brooklyn Lock. It was not a numbered lock. It was an outlet lock that went from the canal Lake Hopatcong. Brooklyn is a corruption of the name Brookland. Remember a few slides before we saw Brookland Ferry. If you say it, Brookland is very difficult to say. Brooklyn rolls off the tongue. So at some point it got corrupted to Brooklyn. And that whole area became known as Brooklyn. Today we have Brooklyn Stanhope Road, Brooklyn Mountain Road. Hopatcong Borough was actually first incorporated as Brooklyn. But so these steamers that are taking passengers through the lock, or up through the canal to the lake, had to go through Brooklyn Lock. Now, for a canal boat captain going through a lock, you do that every day. It's no big deal. But for passengers who go on a vacation, they might not have been quite used to that. So in 1890, a journalist named Gustav Kobe made one of these trips with the Lake Hopatcong passengers through the lock, and he recorded what he said. This is his verbatim statement. The passage through the lock is an interesting experience. The lower gates are open and a miniature steamer glides into the lock, the gates closing behind it. It is now imprisoned in a narrow passage. On either side are high dripping walls, and in front and stern of the closed gates. There is a sudden roar of rushing, surging water. The launch lunges half forward, half upward, and the screw adds to the turmoil. The lunging continues, and the surging water now lifts the launch by the stern, now by the prow. The action of those who have not been through the lock before is a study. The babies cry, the women grab the nearest man by the arm, the girls are prettily flustered, the men endeavor to appear calm, the passengers who have made the passage before look amused, and the only persons absolutely indifferent are the captain and the engineer. So that's a firsthand account of going through Brooklyn Lock. Oh, the lower right, you see what is the lock tender's house there. Today, you might recognize that's Lake Hopatcong Museum, Historical Museum. That's Marty Kane's museum. Great museum. If it's open, make a trip there. There's a lot of great exhibits, including Morris Canal exhibits. All right, so the black line steamers that went through the canal, but there were two very fiercely competing steamer ships, the white line and black line. You could see them in the upper right, almost, having a race there. And if you look at the lower left, you could see the sheer difference in sizes of the white line boat and the black line boat. Why is that? Well, the white line didn't use the canal, so it didn't have to go through the lock. They could create these big side wheel steamers, whereas the black line had to be small enough to fit through the lock. So, I always forget, well, which one is it, black or white that went through the canal? Now what I do is I remember that big white side wheeler, and then I remember that's not the one that went through the canal. That was the one so it docked at the lower part of the lake. And to get to it, you had to, from the train station, go up the stairs and across the road and down to the wharf there. Whereas if you took the black line, all you had to do is just go on the other side of the platform of the station. So the trains would come in one side, you cross the station, you get into a black line steamer and would go up the canal and into Lake Hopatcong. So the boats weren't as nice and big, but it was easier to get to from the train. And that brings us to one of my favorite images of all through the canal. And this was a cartoon done, or an illustration, 1885, called The Drones and the Workers. It was, think about it, in 1885 now, between the station and the entrance to the feeder, this section was shared by both the working canal boats and the vacationers who were riding the steamers up there. So you see this very bedangled canal family, poor and shabbily dressed, and they're looking over, and there is those very wealthy and well-dressed vacationers who were starting their vacation in Lake Hopatcong. They both kind of look at each other with amusement. Now, this also shows the blending of two cultures. It also shows this transition I was talking about from the canal, the Lake Hopatcong, going from a working place to a place of recreation. Now, Lake Hopatcong really catered to the wealthy, the well-to-do vacationer, very big fancy resorts with servants and stuff. Other people who were less wealthy vacation other places. My father's family, who was a German-American family, West New York, New Jersey, they weren't rich enough to go to Lake Hopatcong. They went to Bud Lake. That's where the poorer people went. And Bud Lake was a bunch of little one-room cabins, and families like that. You had 6 people all crammed into a little cabin there, but that's where we went. So it was mostly the wealthy that went to Lake Hopatcong. Okay, and that brings us to landing, which I label this landing a transportation crossroads. If you look at the upper left photo, we're seeing 4 different modes of transportation all converged in landing. In order of chronological order, we got the roads, and roads existed since native time. Canal opened in 1831. The railroad came through in 1850s. And then up on this brand new bridge we see here is a trolley. And the trolley belonged to the Morris County Traction Company, which is a trolley line used to move people across Morris County. And it started in Elizabeth, went to Summit. From there, it went to Chatham, Madison, Morristown, Morris Plains. And then from Denville, it pretty much followed the canal. Rockaway, Wharton, Succasunna, Landing, Ledgewood rather, and then on to Landing. And this is where all these different modes of transportation converge. Now, the trolley did not end at Landing. It actually went up the east side of the lake, and it ended at a place called Bertrand Island. If I mention Bertrand Island, probably what immediately comes to mind is Bertrand Island Amusement Park. And that was very much influenced by the trolley ending there. That's how people got out there. And when the trolley line opened, that's when it started developing into a full-fledged museum. Now, most people know Bertrand Island Amusement Park. It didn't last until the 1980s. Most people don't know there was also amusement park in Nolan's Point. And that was served by the Central Railroad of New Jersey. Now, remember, I mentioned that was transport iron ore. Now it's transporting vacationers up there. But Nolan's Point Amusement Park only lasted till about 1930s. It's about 1930. Why is that? Well, in the 1920s, Henry Ford's mass production took its mark, and now everyone loved their automobiles. Middle-class families could afford cars. Everyone wanted to, transport by car, no longer be tied to the rails. And Nolan's Point, the roads there were very poor parking. Bertrand Island, it was much closer to the main highway, and they had more parking. So that's why Nolan Point Amusement Park died out, and Bertrand Island stayed till 1983. So if we go back to here, of these four modes of transportation, two are gone and two exist. Canal's gone, the trolley's gone, the road still exists, and the train still exists. And that bridge, still the same bridge today. Two arches, one for the rail, one for the canal. It is slated to be replaced, but they are maintaining the two arches as a testament to the Morris Canal once going through there. Okay, now we come to Shippingport. That's another port, meaning port in the Morris Canal, and it was named for Charles Shipman. He bought a bunch of land here, and he did something that kind of upset the Morris Canal Banking Company. He created this mill pond and created his own sawmill. And they didn't like that too much, but they let him do it. So you see the mill pond, you see the sawmill. Also, there was a lower mill pond, and there was a bloomer forge there. So what happened in Shippingport is pretty much what happened in Boonton. We got an inclined plane here. This is 1 east. And what they did is between the upper canal and lower canal, they kind of borrowed the water for this industry here, for the sawmill and for the forge, and then returned it back to the canal at the lower part of the plain. And you can see this very nice diagram done by Joe that shows the whole configuration of Shippingport. And this is a public, where you see the path go across the upper mill pond. That is a public path today. It's Roxbury Township. You can walk on that. It's not in very good condition, needs improved. And you can see the sawmill down there if you look. And then lower left photo shows the Shippingport, where the Rockport Road crossed the canal, and that building there on the right was known as At No Store. So it was a canal store. They also rented rooms, and it was rumored to be a brothel, one of the many places on the canal that was rumored to be a brothel. And the first plane on the eastern side is plane 1 east. It paralleled Shippingport Road. You can see Shippingport Road right on the left there. And if you go there today, this is property owned by the new development that's being built there, but the plane is being kept as a public easement. And if you go there and scratch around in the leaves right on the side of the road, you will find sleeper stones there. So I've done that. We were out there a few years ago, and yeah, I found a few sleeper stones right inside of the road where plane 1 east was. And lower right, you see a really good picture. This is what looks like a sailboat, pleasure boat going up on a cradle. And my guess is this was a boat destined for Lake Hopatcong. So instead of trucking it by road, they transported by canal, and they're taking up plane 1 east to bring it to Lake Hopatcong. So in the later days of the canal, when they weren't really running cargo boats, they were using for other purpose, like pleasure boats like this. All right, Ledgewood now. First stop in Ledgewood is the hole in the wall. What is a hole in the wall? Well, many places along the Morris Canal, the canal intersected with roads. In almost all those cases, the roads went over the canal. And they went over the canal in what are called humpback bridges, meaning they were just high enough that the cargo boats could go underneath them. So they didn't need drawbridges. Now that is the biggest difference, one of the biggest difference between the Morris Canal and the DNR Canal. Morris Canal just ran the cargo boats, so they could go under the bridges. DNR Canal, all kinds of different boats. They had big steamers and schooners and tugboats. So every bridge down in the DNR had to be able to open. So on the DNR, they had bridge tenders down there, just like we had lock and plain tenders, they had bridge tenders. A few weeks ago, I was actually playing a bridge tender at Somerset County's History Weekend. But Morris Canal, we didn't have that. And whereas, so in most places where the roads went over the canal, this is a rare exception where the canal was higher than the road. So the canal went over the road. And so there was a tunnel, there was an aqueduct here, what's called a viaduct that went over, and then just this one lane tunnel that the road went through here. Now, the photo in upper right, you might recognize the photographer. His name was W.J. Harris. He did a lot of photos around Lake Hopatcong and Ledgewood area. And you can notice two things about his photos. First of all, he always marked his negatives in this kind of captions, as you see, Ledgewood Canal Viaduct. And the second thing is he used a certain model in most of his photos. And here you have the model here. And if you look closely, you see a little terrier sitting there. Who knows the name of that terrier? If you do, just shout out. Hypo. That's right. HYPO. Now, it sounds like a weird name, but if you're familiar with photography and working in darkroom, Hypo is one of the photographic solutions. And so he named Hypo. So if you see Harris photos, a lot of times you see a little dog, a little terrier, Hypo in it. So when they built the Morris County Traction Company trolley, they also used this tunnel. So it was very busy road and via trolley going through it. But then once the canal was abandoned in 1924, they removed it almost immediately. Why? Well, again, at that point, automobiles had taken over. There's a large volume of traffic going west. This one lane tunnel just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They had to totally reconfigure this area. So they took down the aqueduct, and lower right, they created the exchange that still exists today, where you're going up and then you have to kind of bear left to stay on 46. So you see the trolley tracks just kind of go up and end, dead end right in that hill there. So the hole in the wall was just a little bit slightly north of that interchange today where we go to stay on 46. So Ledgewood really changed a lot, and we'll see that coming up. Okay, so now we're in the village of Ledgewood, and you see on the right, we have a photo looking north on Main Street. This is another Harris photo, and look at the caption. He says, "Into the country, Ledgewood." Now, looking north from Ledgewood today, you wouldn't think about going into the country, because once you go north, you hit that whole exchange, 46, Route 80, car dealerships, gas stations, all kinds of stuff. But back then in the canal days, once you went north of Ledgewood, there was a whole lot of nothing until you got to Landing. So it really was into the country. And the body of water on the left there you see is was identified as Ledgewood Lake. It was actually a mill pond. There was a grist mill. And if you look at the lower photo, you're looking across the mill pond. And there's two interesting things here. First, you see the trolley making its way either up to Lake Hopatcong or down from there. And then you see the Baptist church. That church was moved down the street, but the building, that older edifice, still exists today as office buildings. And if you look at the top photo, you see those houses up on the upper left there. That's where the canal's coming in. And that brings us to the two inclined planes in Ledgewood, 2 and 3 east. So these are the two inclined planes that were closest to each other, almost right, one right after the other. and they overcame an elevation total of 128 feet. So between Lake Hopatcong and Jersey City, you had 914 feet, 128 of it is right here in Ledgewood. And the upper photo is a very good photo. It's looking from the top of Plane 2 East down. You see that large body of water, the mill pond. You see the church and Main Street and left. And if you look really, really close over at the upper right, you see the flume for Plane 3 East. So you basically come down Plane 2 East just a very short distance till you get to the head of Plane 3 East. Lower the photo looks across the mill pond. That's the grist mill on the other side of the mill pond that it was feeding. So Plane 2 East is one of the best preserved plains in Morris Canal. Definitely encourage you to visit it if you haven't. It's right off Emmons Road. You can see it on the right. And pretty much everything you see in that upper photo, most of it exists. They have the sleeper stones where the rails were, the bypass flume on the right, and where you see the powerhouse, the turbine chamber still exists. There's no turbine in it, but you can take a short trip up to Hopatcong State Park where there's a turbine. And we see the bottom of the plane there, and there we see a picture of a plane with a random cow just standing there. So we're going to see a couple random cow photos today. So right after, so at the bottom of Plane 2 East, there was basin. This basin still partially exists, and it was a pretty large basin, and where boats would wait to go up and down the plane. And right on this basin was a hotel called the Roxbury Hotel. And this was one of the hotels. Remember I said Lake Hopatcong was for the wealthy. This was one of the hotels that would cater more to the middle class. And so it used the basin for water recreation. So you see in the bottom, they have a swim meet there right in the basin. They got some canoeists there. So it kind of had a dual function for the canal boats and for the water recreation for the Roxbury Hotel. It was one of numerous hotels around that kind of, catered to those who were less wealthy. And then right after Plane 2 East came Plane 3 East. It started right near the top of it. You see where the wagon is going across. That's what stays Emmons Road. So if you turn into the driveway for 2 East, that's at the top of Plane 3 East. And it was the shallowest of all the inclined planes, had a pitch of less than 7%. So while Plane 2 East is preserved, Plane 3 East is all private property now. Their house is built on it. But what was the towpath is now Canal Street. So you can walk down Canal Street and see where the plane was. Now, the last meeting, Joe talked a lot about the tender's house at the top of Plane 3 East. And that you could see that when you come in the driveway to Plane 2 East. If you go there, you can certainly look at it from the driveway. I will reiterate again, please stay off the property itself, because it is not only is a private property, it's extremely hazardous site. It's not safe to go in at all, but feel free to look at it from the driveway of the tender's house of 3 East. And then here's the Plane 3 East basin. You see top, the boat's about to go in a cradle up there. Up in the upper left is the Roxbury house. And the lower photo is a great photo, panoramic view of the basin at Plane 3 East. There you go. You got a random cow again. You see in the distance up on the hill, that's the Roxbury house. And that house over on the left still exists. You can see it today if you visit there. Funny thing, I went up to Google Maps to look at the street view. They actually have it blurred out because I think so many people looked at it that, they're saying blur out a house because people are comparing it to the old photograph and so on. But this would have been a very, very popular basin because boats traveling west would now have to traverse 2 planes almost right after each other. So you can imagine in the heyday of the canal, there would have been a lot of boats sitting here waiting. So this was a great place to build a canal store, and they did. That was the King Canal Store. Theodore King, he acquired this stone structure. It's old, 1825. He acquired it in 1873 and turned it into a canal store and post office. And he had a very good business here because not only did he have the whole town of Ledgewood, but he had the canal right across the street. And you can see his house in the background there, very, nice house, very stately. And these are both preserved today. If you go there, you'll see them exactly like they look in the photo. This is preserved by a group called the Roxbury Historic Trust. If you're familiar with Brian Morrell, this is his group, and they did an excellent job preserving the canal house or the King House and the King Store. There's an interior photo of how it looks today, and you can see they made it look not only like a nice store where you can go in and buy things, but a good place to congregate. And you can imagine all the canal boat captains hanging out there and smoking their pipes and drinking their coffee and gossiping. Okay. Okay. So every year Roxbury has reenactors come in and give speeches on the porch of the King's house. To this year it was Abigail Adams. A couple years ago it was Teddy Roosevelt. So you see Teddy there. He looks right at home on the porch of that house giving a speech. So it's the weekend of Old Sucker Sunny Day, the day after they get an actor. And I'd recommend it. Those reenactor guys, they really do a good job. All right, so upper right, this is a very interesting picture. It's looking from the Main Street Bridge east towards our first lock on the eastern side, Lock 1 East. And look at it, it's all open farmland. Now, if you stood in this same place today, first of all, you'd have Route 10 running right in front of you. You'd have the intersection of 10 and 46, right? And all kinds of fast food places and strip malls and, just insanity. And that's really, this is the place that's changed the most in Roxbury Township is Ledgewood. Now, if you look at the lower right photo, this is showing a work scow going through the lock. Now, once the cargo traffic dried up, about 1910, we'll say, the canal was around for about another 15 years. They didn't know what to do with it anymore. So we didn't have cargo boats running, but the canal still had to be maintained until they figured whether they would keep it or abandon it. So these are the work boats you would see going through there. And if you look in the background, you see a bridge. That's actually two bridges. There's a wood bridge in the front, which is a Main Street bridge, and then a metal steel bridge behind it. That was the bridge for the Morris County Traction Company trolley. So it was trolley bridge and road bridge there. So this is when the trolley was running, which would have been after 1908. Now you can visit the site of 1 East. You see, we had a big ribbon cutting. This is called Riggs Canal Park. And it's a little loop trail in there, but you can go in there. We have some interpretive signage. And you can see just the little bit of the wing walls, which are these walls in the lower left photo. And then you can see a little bit of the prism of the canal heading east. So there we were. That was our big ribbon cutting back in 2018 when we opened Riggs Park. People have a hard time finding it. They say, how do you get it? If you're going west on 10, right after you get past the Wycott office in Ledgewood, make a very hard right onto Main Street, and Riggs Park is right on your right. So if you're in the area, stop by. There's some interesting signage, and you can see a little bit of a lock there. All right, heading east from Ledgewood, the canal pretty much followed Route 46, parallel Route 46, and then it made this bend to the north and then followed Berkshire Valley Road into Wharton. So right at the bend was a little community called McCainsville, and today we know it's Kenville. And most of the photos from McCainville is of the Baker's Bridge. So if you look at the 1887 map, Mr. Baker had a cider mill, he had a distillery here. And so even though he didn't own a bridge, it was owned by the Morris Canal Banking Company. They named the bridge after him. So a couple interesting pictures, a little kid on a towpath and horse and carriage on the bridge. If you go there today, this is Hillside Avenue, and you go down Hillside from 46, you'll see a sign, Morris Canal Crossing. You pull over there and look into the woods there. You can see a little bit of the canal prism, but that's pretty much it. But that's where Baker's Bridge was. It's where the canal crossed Hillside Avenue. Okay, Lower Berkshire Valley. So a few years ago, some of you might know, the Canal Society was interested in acquiring the Lafayette School that you see in the lower right. So because of that, I did some research into this area called Lower Berkshire Valley, and I found it was quite an interesting place. First of all, I was provided these great photos by a gentleman named Gary Zeke, whose family was from that area. And I went around Lower Berkshire Valley and learned two things. First of all, it was a very self-contained little village. There was a school there, there was a church, there was a store, and a lot of beautiful houses, and pretty much all of it still exists. The original schoolhouse is now a residence. The general store is a residence. The church is still there. I don't know if it has a congregation or not. And Lafayette, the new Lafayette School is still there. They're trying to figure out what to do with it. But yeah, this was one of those little communities in 19th century that today you would just drive through. It looks like a crossroads, but back then it was one of those completely self-contained villages. Now, the canal ran on the southern part of the Lower Berkshire Valley, and that takes us to the last plane we're going to look at, which is plane 4 east. And there's a very interesting photo in the upper right. These are a couple young men doing what young men like to do, which is show off to young women. So they're standing up there in the cradle and posing, and the women are posing down at the bottom. This is probably after the canal boats are no longer running, so the cradle's sitting, just sitting there idle. And if you look over the shoulder of the woman in the middle, real carefully over the right shoulder, you see there's a bridge that went across. That was the Northern Wharton Railroad. So the canal boats went down the plain and then under the bridge and into Baker's Basin. The photo in the lower left is looking from the bridge, and that's an older photo because you can see a cargo boat is being pulled out of the cradle. Now, this is one of the absolutely worst sites that exists today, because if you look in the lower right, that's looking from the same perspective of the photo to the left, and you see it's a big Roxbury auto salvage yard. So not only is the whole inclined plane gone, but the hill's gone, everything's gone. It's a big junkyard. So there's absolutely nothing there at all that would tell you that there was an inclined plane in this location. And that ironically brings us to the next and then last stop on our journey, and that's Lock 2 East, which ironically is one of the best preserved sites in the Morris Canal. Now, Lock 2 East is not in Roxbury Township, it's in Wharton, but the border of Roxbury Township is right on the other side of its head of the lock, so I am going to include it here. And here's a few historic photos. The one on the bottom is one of our favorite because it shows a boat going through the lock and it shows what everyone's doing. We have these two young ladies here. We're not sure if they're the canal boat captain's daughters or they're just passing by. And we see a boat approaching the head of the lock and the canal tender's house up there. And here you see the Lock 2 East totally preserved. If you had made it to Canal Day in Wharton on August 24th, it was the first day that the tender's house was actually open. Just a few days before the event, we got access to the inside of the tender's house. We transport all this furniture and so on in there. And our volunteer, Pat Mueller, did a great job outfitting it. And so now we have the restored lock, the restored tender's house, and we have inside furnished. Now, next time this will definitely be open is in May, Morris County's Pathways to History, first weekend in May. And if we can get permission, we'll be here and interpreting the lock, and we will have the tender's house open so you can all see it. And that is the end of my presentation. So this is contact information. We got my email if you want to email me, our website, Facebook page, and as I said, our YouTube channel, which you can watch all our program meetings. So before I open up for questions here, are there any on the chat, Jeff?
Only question online was, what's the subject of the Charlie book that Bill's working on?
No, what's the question was, Bill McKelvey, he's working on a trolley, but they want to know the name of it.
The subject of it is.
What's it?
Company, public service.
What, is there a subject to your book you're working on, Bill?
Will cover the Easton and Washington Traction Company from Phillipsburg up to Washington and Fort Murray. It will also cover the DL&W, the Lackawanna Railroad, and it will cover the Morris Canal, and it will cover Route 57. That corridor with all those forms of transportation, as well as the main industries, Ingersoll Rand, Edison, Portland Cement, the piano and organ business
okay.
in Washington, and Warren Pipe Foundry.
Okay, so it's basically focused on Warren County. Okay, so to answer the question, it's going to be mostly Warren County, the trolley, the rail, the Morris Canal, Route 57, and the industries along there like Edison plant and the concrete mile and so on. That's what Beth and I working down in Warren County a lot, so we're familiar with that. In fact, we're doing a tour tomorrow that covers some of that down in Port Colden. So that was the only question online, Jeff. Okay. Any questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
You go for a trek, then you have to wait for a lock, then you gotta wait for this other stuff, you gotta go down a plane, all like the journey we took today, how long would that take in its most efficient day?
Okay, well, that's a good question. What would what I can tell you is the journey all the way across the state, which started in Phillipsburg and went to Jersey City, was 5 days. So the journey we took today, I would say at least a half a day to get across. The boats were going 2-3 miles an hour. Now, a lot of that depends on what area we are in the canal. Now, the canal's heyday was in the 1860s. So there, it would have been much slower because you had long waits at canals and at locks and climb planes and so on. Later on, which is most of where these photographs come from, is early part of the 20th century. So you would have been moving much faster because you had the wait. Now, when I say 5 days, you're talking about a day that might start 5 in the morning and go to 9 o'clock at night. Because first of all, in the middle of summer, it stays light very late. But what would stop you is not the darkness. You could run in the darkness. What would stop you is coming to a lock or an inclined plane that was closed for the night. So there were a couple long level stretches of canal with no change in elevation at all. The longest was 17, second longest was 11. So if you were strategic, you would hit your last elevation change right before sunset, and you could run for another several miles before you had to stop. So yeah, it was 5 days, but that's a long day. Yes, sir. Yeah, no, they didn't know.
At 17-mile level near Hopatcong, but once you got to the next lock and plane, that's as far as you go.
Yeah. So the canal ran 6 days a week. It did not close on Sunday. It did not run on Sunday. So that would be the day you'd tie up and do your laundry and do your chores and make your repairs to the boat and go to church if you were church going. Socialize with the other boaters, right? Yes, sir.
To the lock.
Yeah.
The lake. And then what? There wasn't a tow path around the lake, so how did you?
Oh, no. The steam launches, the ones that transported the people, they had engines on them. So they weren't pulled by mule. They would have.
But you put the lock to the lake.
No, they did when they were transporting iron ore. So they were towed from Nolan's Point where the ore docks were. They were towed across the lake by a steamer. Once you got into the canal, then you'd hook them up to the mules and pull them down the feeder to the main canal. So if you go to Hopatcong State Park today, and you go under the bridge from Lakeside Boulevard, you can pick up the feeder canal and you can see the tow path is there. So yes, the mules would be pulling the cargo boats along the feeder canal. The launches that transport the passengers, they were by steam engine. Yeah, Bill.
after it was raised, are they both in approximately the same scale?
I can go back to there and see, let's see, here's my,
Because it's quite a dramatic difference in the size of the lake and the two views. Yeah,
no, the scale of the 1769 is wider than the one of the today. So today really shows the west. I mean, if you look at Brooklyn Ferry here, so that's Hopatcong State Park. Hopatcong State Park is there today. So I think it's a little bit wider.
Wasn't the lake dammed up though?
Yeah, it was dammed up.
Bigger today than it?
Yeah, that's what on the right. The dam is right here. And that's what creates all this, what made it bigger than it was back then. Yeah, I think it's a wider perspective on the older one. You got a phone question?
Whether the way it's been here now,
Mhm.
what happened to the canal when they had those stretches where they were out of water and I had. No, they're not gonna run during the winter when the canals are frozen. But what happened then?
They were drawing water off of so many different water sources that they had to keep, the canal was 5 feet deep. And you had to maintain that level. Any lower and the boats were on the ground, any higher and you're washing off out the banks and the tow path. So that's why they had all these different reservoirs and feeders across rivers, creeks. They were drawing water off of everything. And so, you know, when you had a really dry summer like now, or dry period like now, Lake Hopatcong would be very, very low because they're drawing so much water. I don't know if you've been out to Spruce Run Reservoir. That's like crazy. It's almost empty. That's because they've been drawing water off to feed the Raritan River because they don't want to get it too salty. So that would be like Lake Hopatcong when you had a really, but Lake Hopatcong in its main sections, it's like 200 feet deep. It's very deep. So you have a lot of water there.
Town like Booton, where they were taking a lot of the water from the canal to run the ironworks.
But they returned it to the canal. It was like what happened at Shippingport. They would borrow from the upper canal, would run all that, and then the water would come out and go back to the canal. So you didn't lose the water, you just kind of borrowed it for a time being. Yes, sir.
And also, that same principle of lowering, like how they move folks through the Panama Canal with a lot, the same principle.
Same principle, you're just talking at a much, much larger scale. When I was a kid, we had a cabin cruise when we went up to Expo 67 in Montreal. And we went through, the huge locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And we were like in this cabin cruise with huge ship on one side and this huge wall on the other side. And I remember thinking like, my God, we get crushed like that. So yeah, it's the same principle, it's much larger scale. A condo. Well, the island itself is always an island. It's actually a peninsula. It was created an island for the amusement park, but where the amusement park was is now condos, if that's what you question. But also Lake Hopatcong Yacht Club is on Bertrand's Island. That's a great place, very historic. Any other questions? It's going once, going twice. Okay, thank you. Oh yes. I mean, what's the charter of the Canal Society in New Jersey? Two things. We want to preserve the canal, expand the greenway by land acquisition and developing towpaths and so on, and education about the canal. So what I'm doing here tonight is hopefully educating to a certain extent, so you'll be interested in the canal and then you'll become a supporter either through money, time, volunteering, whatever, to keep it going when everyone in this room is gone, or most of us are gone, and keep it going further and continue spanning it. Because there's lots of land across New Jersey that's still not developed, or it's in private hands, or, it's municipalities that are just not interested in the Greenway that we want to expand and preserve what's out there today. Last Saturday, in fact, I did a trip across, Morris County looking at the Greenway. And, some sites that looked great 5 years ago and fallen to disrepair. So it's constant, like, develop new sites, keep the old sites up. And then you have municipalities where sometimes they're big advocates, and then like someone retires and they go back into total oblivion. So it's constant struggle to keep not only develop new sites, but maintain the ones that are out there.
Pointed out to me that part of the prison, the canal, is in the median of the Garden State Parkway.
Yes,
Way widens out here, it was a double bridge, down, one bridge, it's near Silk Street, it's Bloomfield, but it ran right through the parkway, and then it goes behind the golf course.
and then JFK Drive and Bloomfield, that's all canal. I didn't know that, I used to drive that all the time, and I had no idea I was driving was canal.
Right.
Yeah, city subway is part of canal. Yeah. And Route 80, where you go by Patterson's and so, those parts will never going to be Canal Greenway again. Okay, you want to finish up?
Okay. A couple of closing comments on Tim's talk. There are some of the best places to visit the Morris Canal and the Morris Canal Greenway are the places that Tim talked about. We just finished a huge sign project for Plane 2 Canal Park in Ledgewood, one of the finest locations along the canal to learn about canal stuff and inclined planes and all that stuff. And now there's going to be a whole regiment of interpretive panels to describe, to tell anybody who wanders in there what that's all about. Next year, we're going to be working on Plane 1 just up the road. That's going to be in public venue. That property is being donated by the developer to the township, and they're going to be taking possession of that, and we're going to be doing an interpretive panel signs for that. And so just some perspective on the Morris Canal Greenway, we got a 102-mile long project. It's a huge project with many, many locations. It's never going to be the Appalachian Trail. It's things like Route 80, they will move it. But it's an $11 million project involving endless numbers of communities, many people, many, many things to do. And so we have a great time doing it.
We do, yes.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but we keep doing it. Any other thoughts or questions? Sir?
Before it was preserved or anything, we were walking through the woods there trying to find that dam for the basin. I think we found something, but I don't know if it was a dam.
It's always fun looking, whether you find it or not. I think
It's come a long way. It's taken a lot of work and a lot of dedicated people to make that happen.
Bill Roth and Clayton Smith and when it was just getting, when we were just getting started, and I don't recognize them, these pictures. Very years ago.
When I ask you folks if you'd like to volunteer and help us do the things that we do, we do so many things beside, everything from digging holes to talking to people, schmoozing with politicians, planning events, trying to talk a mayor and council into taking a free sign project. All kinds of interesting things.
Anybody knows any politicians? Let us know. If you're on a first name basis, whether it's be a big help to the Greenway.
If the people in a town don't want us, any project that you offer is not going to happen. So we're constantly schmoozing with people and building partnerships and getting things done that we promised to do. So that's what we do all day. Thank you all for coming.
if you'd like me to